And this is where they jump. So this is the drop zone Victor. Now, I want to just pause this drop about here. Because George Smith says that the most important time for him as the Pathfinder, as it were, is to orientate himself whilst he's coming down. That's the very brief moment when he can have a good look around, see where he is, and get a good idea of whereabouts he's about to land. He describes his descent as perfect. He says that there wasn't much of a jolt on the canopy opening. He says he wasn't being fired upon, though he could see a tracer further away, and he believes it was still firing at the aircraft that they just jumped off. He describes at this time as well that there was no moon, and I'm not sure if that's right, because I would have thought the full moon would probably be out by now, but it might be that it was cloudier than he that the clouds were covering it. I'll have to check the actual times of the moonrise on D-Day. And he describes, obviously, the night vision coming in. But what's the important thing on his diary is he mentions that he could see a large building half a mile away, when he calls it half left, and another about 3/4 of a mile away, half right. Now, if we assume that he was facing forwards and he's when he's looking at the tracer and he can see it to go into the aircraft, then he's obviously facing south. And when he means half right, it suggests a 45-degree angle to that the direction of the aircraft. So if that's the case, what he says is that he identifies a building. The first building which he identifies as a large building half a mile away and half left, as being the Varreville headquarters, which was a German military headquarters, obviously he's been told about. And when we look at this this drop zone, this is Varreville here. We've got the church in the middle, and he says there's a large building. Now, these buildings aren't photogrammic, so they're just what Micro Soft Flight Simulator has placed in. But presumably, it's going to be in this direction and about half a mile. Well, what would we say would be half a mile? This is I mean, we're talking possibly about here. Around about this. We're talking possibly this way, and that's half left. And then he talks about that he can see a building which was 3/4 of a mile away, half right. Now, 3/4 of a mile away is possibly this. These are the village. This is the village of Gonneville. So if we then say, okay, half right, half left, half a mile closer to this one, we're talking probably this is likely to be where he landed. He describes the landing as a bit of an embarrassment to the paratroop training school. But he remembers, he was twisted. When he sat up, he punches the quick release thing, pulls off his leg straps on the parachute, and rips open his zip fastener on his jump jacket, and all pretty quickly. Within that time, he has time to realise no one's shooting at him, and very quickly he hears and he says this guy, Dusty Miller, the company sergeant Miller, had landed literally a few yards away. He describes it almost 4 yards away. Well, I mean, he was almost on top of each other then. So they were found together, and then within seconds, another shadow comes towards them, and it's Company Sergeant Harold. So these guys have landed, presumably, in this area, within 20 feet of each other, 20 yards of each other, which is pretty impressive. He describes how lucky they were because if, say, Harold or Miller had landed either side of a hedge, he says then you wouldn't know they were there, and it would be very difficult to meet up. He also describes that at the drop site there was very little wind. And so he said that he doffs his cap to the meteorological office, and that they got the weather forecast right. So it's interesting, those little snippets there. We always have this image in our head of these guys are landing or jumping out in a very windy conditions, and of course there's going to be different conditions in different places in Normandy, but it's not all that thing about, okay, there were strong winds, and so therefore sometimes when you hear these things about the drops being dispersed because of the wind, one it doesn't sound that it was particularly windy in some places, and two, they're jumping from 700 feet over a pretty big drop zone. This is the drop zone that we're looking at, which is this yellow fields, these wide fields here, this area, and over to this area here. So from 700 feet, even if you had a 20-mile-an-hour wind, you're not going to drift too far off, of course. So, sometimes there's something, a little bit of a miss there, and maybe the majority of the dispersion of the parachuters comes down to once they're down, not being able to orientate themselves, but also probably just errors in the actual RAF's dropping of the in place. So they land. It's 20 minutes past. Now his immediate thoughts was that he knew that there would be a bombing raid on the Merville battery. And their initial intention was just to sort of, spend those 10 minutes probably finding each other in the dark, getting themselves organised, and then waiting for the bombing raid to finish. It seems a bit silly that they didn't put the bombing raid in first and then put the guys in, but that seemed to be the order that it had to be done at the time. He describes that the battery is 2,400 yards away, and it's in this direction over here. So if we just remember where this is the battery here. And what he's saying is that there's going to be a bombing run, and the bombing run, they wanted to make sure that they were out of the peripheral area of it. But because they basically managed to get themselves organized so quickly, they're just tempted to go for it. They felt that because it was so far away that but think that they should be safe where they were. So they decide to just get going, and when they heard the bombers coming, they would then take cover. So they kept in the shadows of the hedges, and they said they did quite a good pace until they could hear the bombers come in. And they decided that they'd get into a ditch, and then it suddenly could hear these bombs falling. And what was happening, and what did happen, was well, first of all, he says he couldn't resist watching these bombs coming in, and he sees this large field in front of him, possibly this one here, and he says to the others, let's run across this field, whilst the Germans have got their heads down taking cover from the bombs. So they say they dart out across this field, and then they realise that the bombs are falling, well, not necessarily on Merville, but they were overflying and they were landing between, they say, Merville and them. So it's and that's basically in this area here. We'll learn as well that the RAF has basically overshot and dropped bombs in this area here. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if these dark dots here in this field are filled in bomb craters. You can sometimes see on just the ground, where they've been filled in, so there's a more sort of topsoil, and again you can see suspicious sort of circular dots that could possibly be where these bombs have overshot. So they're running across this field, and then the bombs start falling near them. And so they describe it as a sound like of express trains coming down, landing near them, and they threw themselves to the ground, and they clasped their hands around their backs of their necks, and they must have been trained on how to cover from these things, because he says specifically, he puts your hands behind your around the back of your neck, your forearms is pressed over your ears, and our elbows, they say, lifting our bodies slightly from the ground. So it must be something that they're trained to avoid the sort of concussion of the bombs. So he talks that this lasts 10 minutes. So let's just move the clock on. So the bombing raid was at past, and it lasts about 10 minutes. So we're about 20 minutes now to 1. There's also reports as well when that the village here of Gonneville, the bombing had started some fires here. They once the bombing raid's finished, they get up and they run across the rest of the field, and they say they come to what is a track. He expected it to be a good road, but it just turned out to be a sort of a farm track, and he believes that it's the correct road that they were looking for, but the reconnaissance photographs had exaggerated it, and it could possibly be this road here. At this point, he they move along the hedge, and they come across the Batman of Major Alan Parry. His name was Private George Adsett. Adsett and Major Alan Parry, they were part of the RV Rendezvous Party. And it's at this point that he points out to George Adsett what he believes is the RV point. So he instructs him to make his way there. And when he gets there and he meets battalion to leave a message to say that the battalion recce party has landed safely and they're now pushing on to do their job. So